a body count so large it sounds like a typo. In the year 1780, the most dangerous building in Paris wasn't a prison. It wasn't a palace, it was a cemetery. On the night of May 31st, in the middle of the city's busiest neighborhood, the wall of a mass grave at the Cemetery of the Innocents simply gave way. 200 years of corpses, stacked in pits 30 feet deep, burst through into the basement of the house next door. Decomposing bodies, liquefied remains. The smell alone reportedly made people 6 streets away. Paris had a problem, not a small one. The city had been burying its dead in the same handful of cemeteries for almost 1,000 years, and those cemeteries were now so overstuffed with bodies that the ground itself was failing. So, the city did something almost nobody talks about. When they talk about Paris, they decided to empty out the cemeteries, all of them. Millions of corpses dug up by hand and moved into the abandoned stone quarries running underneath the city. That decision created what's now called the Catacombs, but what the workers who built it called something else entirely, l'Empire de la Mort, the Empire of Death. And what's actually down there is stranger, older, and far more deliberate than most visitors realize. By the end of this video, you'll know why there's a doorway down there, inscribed with a warning that's been freaking people out for 200 years, what's actually hidden in the unmapped 200 miles of tunnel the public never sees, and the one detail about how those bones got arranged that turns this from a creepy tourist stop into one of the strangest art installations on Earth. Let's go underground. The city was built on top of its own worst secret. Here's the part most people get backwards. The tunnels came first, the bones came second. Long before anyone was dead and buried down there, those tunnels were quarries, and they're the entire reason Paris looks the way it does. Starting in the Middle Ages, Parisians dug straight down into the limestone beneath their own city to build the city above it. Notre Dame, the Louvre, entire neighborhoods, all of it was carved out of the rock that used to be directly under Paris's feet. For centuries, nobody thought much about the empty space left behind. They just kept building on top of it. By the 1700s, that was starting to go very wrong. Streets started collapsing. A road called the Rue d'Enfer, literally Street of Hell, opened up into a sinkhole so dramatic that the king ordered an actual government department created just to inspect the tunnels and stop the city from swallowing itself. That department still exists today, by the way, under a different name, and it's the reason the catacombs are mapped at all. So you've already got a city sitting on hundreds of miles of hollowed out rock. And now you've got cemeteries so overloaded that walls are bursting and bodies are surfacing in people's basements. Someone in the French government looked at those two problems sitting side by side and had the kind of idea that sounds insane until you realize it actually worked. Empty one problem into the other. Take the empty tunnels, fill them with the bodies that have nowhere else to go. That's beat one of the plan. But here's the part that should bother you a little more than it probably does. Moving a few bones is one thing. They moved 6 million people, and the way they actually did it is far stranger than just dig them up and dump them in a hole. This wasn't a renovation project. It was a funeral that lasted 2 years. Starting in 786, Paris began the largest exhumation in human history, and they did it as a kind of slow, deliberate ritual that most documentaries skip right past. Workers didn't dig during the day. They worked at night by torchlight because Parisians found the sight of cart after cart of human remains rolling through their streets too disturbing for daylight hours. Priests walked alongside the carts, chanting funeral rites over bones that, in many cases, belonged to people who'd been dead for centuries and had no living family left to mourn them. Think about the logistics of that for a second. This wasn't a few weeks of cleanup. The transfer of remains from the Cemetery of the Innocents alone took 2 years. And that was just one cemetery out of dozens being emptied across the city. The whole project, moving essentially the entire deceased population of Paris from its surface graveyards into the old quarries below Montparnasse, stretched on for decades, well into the 1800s. And once the bones arrived underground, here's where it gets genuinely strange. They didn't just pile them up. The man in charge of the ossuary, Louis-Étienne Héricart de Thury, looked at literal mountains of disorganized human remains and decided this needed to be something more than a dumping ground. He had workers arrange the bones, femurs and skulls facing outward, the way you'd stack firewood, into deliberate walls, patterns, even decorative designs. Some sections form crosses, others form hearts made entirely of skulls. He turned a mass grave into something between a monument and a museum. But why would anyone do that? Why take the time to make a sewer for the dead look intentional, almost beautiful? The answer to that question is the same reason there's a sign down there that has been making visitors turn around and walk straight back out for 2 centuries. Hook, 4 words carved in stone that every visitor has to walk past. If you actually go to the catacombs today, and over 500,000 people do every single year, there's a specific moment where the tour stops being a museum and starts feeling like something else. You walk down a spiral staircase, almost 20 meters underground, through narrow stone corridors that go on for a while with nothing in them at all, just rock. And then, right before the ossuary opens up in front of you, there's a stone archway. And carved directly into it, in French, are 4 words. Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Stop, this is the Empire of Death. It's not a translation choice for the tourists. The original engravers carved that exact phrase into the stone in the 1700s, and it's still the literal name engineers and historians use for this place. Not the ossuary, not the catacombs, l'Empire de la Mort, an empire, like it has its own borders, its own population, its own ruler. And in a way, it does. 6 million subjects and not one of them leaving. People react to that doorway in a way that almost never happens with a sign. Tour guides will tell you visitors physically stop walking. Some turn around right there and ask to go back up. It's not because the words are scary on their own, it's because of what's waiting on the other side of them, which you genuinely cannot see until you're standing in the middle of it. That phrasing and that placement wasn't an accident either. Heracart III, the same man who arranged those bones into hearts and crosses, wanted this space to function less like a warehouse and more like a meditation on mortality itself. He added inscriptions throughout the tunnels, lines from poets, philosophers, even the Bible, all about death, time, and the brevity of life. He was building something closer to an 18th century philosophical experience than a storage solution, which raises an obvious question. If this place was designed to be walked through and reflected on, why did it take until 1809, almost 30 years after the bones started arriving, for anyone to actually be allowed inside? For 3 decades, this was the most forbidden address in Paris. For most of its early existence, the catacombs weren't a tourist attraction. They were a restricted government worksite, and getting in without permission was treated as a real crime. That didn't stop people from trying. Almost as soon as word spread that there was a vast, unsupervised network of tunnels under the city, a specific kind of person started sneaking in: explorers, thrill seekers, and eventually, the people who'd come to be called cataphiles, a name that's still used today for the underground enthusiasts who treat these tunnels as their own private city. One of the earliest recorded incidents involves a man named Philibert Aspera, a hospital porter who, in 1793, wandered into the quarry tunnels. Not even the finished ossuary, just the raw maze of mining passages, looking for a hidden wine cellar he'd heard was stashed down there. He never came back out. His body wasn't found until 11 years later, just a few feet from an exit he never managed to locate. He's buried exactly where he was found, and his grave is still down there today, often cited as the reason the official keepers of the catacombs eventually pushed so hard for proper maps, gates, and controlled access. Because here's the thing people underestimate about this place. It's not one tunnel. It's not even close. The mapped, lit official tourist route that 500,000 people walk every year covers less than a mile. The actual tunnel network underneath Paris is estimated at well over 200 miles. So what's in the other 109 miles that nobody official ever shows you? There's an entire underground subculture that's been throwing parties in a graveyard since the 1700s. The unmapped, unofficial tunnels are where the real legend of the catacombs actually lives, and where the cataphiles come in. For centuries, this underground network has had its own unofficial population. Not residents exactly, but a recurring community of people who know the access points, manholes, forgotten quarry entrances, sewer junctions that the official maps don't mention. The French police have an entire unit nicknamed the Cataflics, whose job is specifically to patrol these tunnels and catch trespassers. That's how persistent the unofficial traffic down there is.